Group B rallying was the most insane motorsport ever created. 600 horsepower monsters with virtually no rules, flying through forests at 130 miles per hour, inches from spectators who had a death wish. The Audi Quattro, the Lancia Delta S4, the Peugeot 205 T16. These weren't just rally cars. They were engineering marvels that pushed the absolute limits of what was possible. But the price of that insanity? 4 lives lost in just 3 years, and a sport that was forced to confront a brutal truth it had been ignoring. Listen, everyone talks about Group B like it was this golden era of rallying. And yeah, the cars were absolutely mental. But here's what most people get wrong about Group B. It wasn't just one crash that killed it. It was a series of tragedies that exposed how dangerously out of control the whole thing had become. The cars had evolved too fast, the safety equipment hadn't kept up, and the people paying the price weren't just the drivers. Today, I'm breaking down every single fatal crash from the Group B era. Not to sensationalize it, but because if you want to understand why the FIA pulled the plug on the most exciting racing series ever created, you need to know what actually happened. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Group B wasn't just dangerous. It was inevitable that it would end the way it did. The first warning, Attilio Bettega. The first death came in 1985, and it should have been the wake-up call that changed everything, but it wasn't. Attilio Bettega was an Italian rally driver for Lancia, experienced, talented, and driving one of the most competitive cars on the grid, the Lancia 037. On May 2nd, 1985, during the Tour de Corse in Corsica, Bettega was flying through Stage 4 when everything went wrong. The roads in Corsica are narrow, twisty, and lined with trees. One mistake and you're into the scenery. There's no runoff, no barriers, no second chances. Bettega came into a fast right-hander. He was pushing hard, trying to make up time. His front wheel clipped a stone on the edge of the road. The car went light. It went airborne. The Lancia came down nose first, straight into a tree at approximately 120 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. The front of the car disintegrated. Bettega died instantly from massive head and chest injuries. His co-driver, Maurizio Parisino, walked away without a scratch. Now here's what made this crash different from other accidents. This wasn't a spectator incident. This wasn't a freak mechanical failure. This was a pure driver error on a stage that by 1985 standards wasn't even considered particularly dangerous. The problem? Bettega was wearing a helmet and a 4-point harness, but the roll cage in the Lancia wasn't designed to handle head-on impacts at those speeds. The Lancia's aluminium and fiberglass construction crumpled like paper. There was no crash structure, no crumple zones, nothing to absorb the impact except the driver's body. Lancia was devastated. The FIA launched an investigation, but they didn't slow the cars down. They didn't reduce the power. They didn't move the spectators back. They just carried on. And that decision would prove fatal. The tragedy that changed everything. Portugal, 1986. If Bettega's death was the warning, Portugal, 1986, was the earthquake that brought the whole thing crashing down. The Rally de Portugal was always mental. Narrow roads, massive jumps, and crowds that treated the rally like a festival. Spectators would stand literally inches from the racing line, reaching out to touch the cars as they flew past at 100 miles per hour. It was part of the culture, part of the thrill. But it was also a disaster waiting to happen. On March 6, 1986, Joaquim Santos was driving a Ford RS 200 through the very first stage of the rally. Santos was a local hero, a Portuguese driver in a British supercar, and the crowds were absolutely packed. We're talking thousands of people lining a road that was barely wide enough for one car. The RS 200 was one of the most advanced Group B cars ever built. Mid-engined, four-wheel drive, over 400 horsepower. It was a rocket ship, and Santos was pushing it hard. Then, disaster. Santos came over a crest at high speed. On the other side, the road kinked slightly left, but what he didn't see was the crowd. Hundreds of spectators were packed onto both sides of the road. Some were standing in the road itself, expecting to jump out of the way at the last second. Santos crested the rise. The car went light. He lost control. When the RS 200 landed, it was already sideways. Santos hit the brakes, but on loose gravel, the car didn't slow down. It just went straight into the crowd. The RS 200 plowed through spectators like a missile. Bodies were thrown into the air. People were screaming. The car tumbled off the road and down a steep embankment, flipping multiple times. When it finally stopped, the scene was absolute carnage. 3 spectators were killed instantly at the scene, a woman and 2 children. A 4th person, another child, died later in hospital. Over 30 spectators were seriously injured, some with life-changing injuries. Broken bones, internal bleeding, traumatic amputations. Santos and his co-driver survived, but both were seriously injured. Santos suffered severe burns and multiple fractures. His co-driver had life-threatening injuries and spent weeks in intensive care. But here's the thing that made this crash so significant. This wasn't the first time spectators had been hit in Group B. There had been close calls throughout 1985. Drivers had been complaining for months that the crowds were out of control. Team managers had raised concerns. The FIA knew it was a problem. They just didn't act fast enough. The Portuguese authorities were furious. Teams immediately pulled out of the rally. The event was cancelled. The FIA was under massive international pressure. Governments were threatening to ban rallying altogether. But even after Portugal, Group B wasn't cancelled. Not yet. The final straw, Henry Toivonen. 4 days after Portugal, the FIA held an emergency meeting. They discussed banning Group B immediately, but the manufacturers pushed back hard. There was too much money invested, too much prestige on the line. Audi, Peugeot, Lancia, Ford, they'd all spent millions developing these cars. So they compromised. They'd ban Group B, but not until the end of the 1986 season. They'd implement new safety measures, move the crowds back, make the stages safer, give everyone time to transition to the new regulations. It was too little, too late. 2 months later, on May 2nd, 1986, exactly 1 year to the day after Bettega's death, the crash that finally killed Group B happened on the island of Corsica. Henry Toivonen was one of the fastest drivers in the world. Finnish, fearless, and absolutely committed. He was leading the 1986 World Rally Championship. He'd won in Monte Carlo, he dominated in Sweden, he was untouchable. His car, the Lancia Delta S4, was the most advanced Group B machine ever built. It had both a turbocharger and a supercharger, producing over 500 horsepower in race trim and potentially 600 in qualifying. It weighed barely 900 kilograms. It was essentially a 500 horsepower rocket ship with 4 wheels. On the second day of the Tour de Corse, Toivonen was leading the rally by over a minute. He was in complete control. But something went wrong on a stage called Corte Taverna. Toivonen came into a tight left-hander. There were no witnesses close enough to see exactly what happened. No skid marks, no signs of mechanical failure. The car just left the road. The Delta S4 went off the outside of the corner, dropped down a steep embankment and plunged into a ravine. It landed on its roof. The aluminium fuel tank, mounted directly under the driver's seat, ruptured on impact. Fuel spilled onto the red-hot turbocharger. Then it caught fire. The car exploded. The magnesium components in the engine and chassis ignited. Within seconds, the entire car was engulfed in flames. Toivonen and his co-driver Sergio Cresto were trapped inside. Both men died from smoke inhalation and burns before rescue crews could reach them. The fire was so intense that it took over an hour to extinguish. When they finally recovered the bodies, the car was nothing but a charred skeleton. The Delta S4 had been burned down to its space frame. The official investigation never determined a cause. Lancia's engineers couldn't find any mechanical fault. Some speculated Toivonen had suffered a blackout or a medical episode. Others pointed to the lack of skid marks, suggesting he never even tried to brake. We'll never know. What we do know is this: the crash exposed the fundamental flaw in Group B. The cars were too light, the fuel tanks were too exposed, the speeds were too high, and the safety standards were nowhere near good enough. The aftermath and the forgotten tragedy. Toivonen's death was the final straw. The FIA couldn't ignore it anymore. The manufacturers couldn't defend it. The public was outraged. The media was calling for heads to roll. Within 48 hours, the FIA announced that Group B would be banned immediately. Not at the end of the season, not after one more rally, immediately. The 1986 season would continue under Group B regulations, but 1987 would see the introduction of Group A. Slower, heavier, safer cars. The manufacturers were furious. They'd spent millions developing these cars. Audi had the Sport Quattro S1. Peugeot had the 205 T16 Evolution 2. Lancia had the Delta S4. Ford had the RS 200. All of it was now worthless. Millions of pounds, dollars, and marks down the drain. But the FIA, didn't care. 4 people were dead. Dozens more were injured. Group B was over. But there was one more tragedy that same year that people often forget. Mark Schurer was a Formula One driver who also competed in rallies. In August 1986, just 3 months after Toivonen's death, Schurer was driving a Ford RS 200 at the Hessen Rally in Germany. He was traveling at around 200 kilometers per hour when he lost control. The car hit a tree broadside, broke in half, and burst into flames. Schurer was thrown from the wreckage, his overalls on fire. He crawled to a nearby stream to put out the flames. He survived but suffered severe burns, multiple fractures to both ankles, and was left in a coma for 3 weeks. His co-driver, Michael Weider, wasn't so lucky. He died in the fire. This crash happened after the FIA had already announced the end of Group B. It proved that even with the writing on the wall, these cars were still killing people. Schurer never fully recovered. His top-level racing career was over. Why it happened? So why did Group B become so deadly? It wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of bad decisions that all came together at the worst possible time. First, the cars evolved too fast. When Group B started in 1982, the cars had maybe 300 horsepower. The Audi Quattro had 350. By 1986, they had 600. That's a 100% increase in just 4 years. The safety equipment, the tracks, the regulations, none of it kept pace. The cars were outrunning the sport's ability to control them. Second, the cars were too light. The minimum weight was just 890 kilograms. To hit that target, manufacturers stripped out everything they could. Safety equipment was minimal. Roll cages were as light as possible. Fuel tanks were exposed. Crash structures were almost non-existent. These cars were built to win, not to protect their occupants. Third, the spectators were out of control. Rally culture in the 1980s was different. People wanted to be close to the action. They wanted to feel the cars fly past. In countries like Portugal, Spain, and Greece, fans would stand on the racing line. Marshals couldn't control them. Organizers didn't have the resources. It was a ticking time bomb. Fourth, the tracks weren't designed for these speeds. Group B cars were doing speeds that were meant for Formula One circuits, but on narrow forest roads with no runoff areas, no barriers, and no margin for error. A mistake at 130 miles per hour on a rally stage was almost always fatal. And fifth, the FIA was too slow to act. They were reactive, not proactive. They'd implement safety measures after crashes, not before them. After Bottega's death in 1985, they could have stepped in. After Portugal in March 1986, they should have stepped in, but they didn't. It took Toivonen's death to finally force their hand. By the time they realized how dangerous Group B had become, it was too late. The legacy. Group B's legacy is complicated. On one hand, it produced some of the most incredible racing ever seen. The cars were engineering marvels. The drivers were legends. The footage is still breathtaking today, nearly 40 years later. But on the other hand, 4 people died in World Championship events. Families were destroyed. Careers were ended. And for what? Entertainment, spectacle, the pursuit of speed at any cost? The ban on Group B led to the creation of Group A, which was slower, safer, and frankly, a bit boring by comparison. The cars were heavier, the power was restricted, the spectators were kept back, but it was necessary. Rallying needed to reset, it needed to prioritize safety over spectacle. Today, modern rally cars are actually faster than Group B cars ever were. A current WRC car will beat a Group B car on almost any stage, but they're also safer. The roll cages are stronger, the harnesses are better, the fuel cells are protected, the tracks are controlled, the spectators are kept back behind barriers. If you enjoyed this deep dive, I'm going to be posting a lot more content like this, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. And if you want to see how modern WRC cars compare to these Group B monsters, check out the video I've linked on screen. Thanks for watching.